Mr. President, please be seated. The court is now in session. During today's sessions and as scheduled, the Chamber continues hearing the testimony of witness Pan Wan. Madam Sakolvati is now instructed to report to the Chamber the current status of the parties to the proceedings. The Greffier. Good morning, Mr. President. During today's sessions, all the parties to the proceedings are present, except Mr. Ingsari, who is present, but in his holding cell due to his health concerns. During today's sessions, starting from the morning, the Chamber continues hearing the testimonies of Mr. Pan Wan, who is now before the Chamber. In the afternoon session, the Chamber continues hearing the testimony of civil party Madame Denise Afonso through remote or video conference. According to the report by the AVPUS officers, the equipments are ready for today and this afternoon session. Judge Lavange, would you wish to continue putting a few more questions to the witness? You may now proceed.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a few questions to ask the witness. Good morning, Mr. Kamfan. If we can, I would like to come back to the administrative structures and to the connections between Sector 105 and the North East region. You told us that Sector 105 was, as far as you were aware, autonomous. But can you tell us if there were, in fact, relations between Sector 105 and the North East region, please?
Response. There was a connection between Sector 105 and the Northwest zone. There was some kind of connection through the border. However, when it comes to administrative communication, the report had to be done vertically, from bottom up.
There may be a slip here. Because in my earphones I heard northwest, but we're talking here about the northeast.
Response. Well, I was talking about the south, the northeast, indeed.
Merci. Donc, vous nous dites que...
Thank you. So you're telling us that all of the communications between Sector 105 and the Northeast Zone had to be organized hierarchically. So all of the communication had to go through who? Through the Central Committee? Through Office 870? Who did the communications go through?
Response. According to my understanding, the communication went through 870, but at the same time, there was a committee along the border where the communication could channel through. This committee was set up by the upper echelon, and there were names of individuals in the committee, though I don't remember all the names, but I knew for sure that such committee existed.
who was in charge of the northeast region? Do you remember that?
Response. Taya was the secretary of that zone during the time when I had worked there.
Can you remember what happened to Taya? Was Taya also known under the name of Ne Saran?
Response. I am afraid I don't know his other name other than Taya because he was popularly known as Taya at that time. Previously, his wife was somehow connected to my mother by marriage, or rather, his wife was connected to my mother as she was my mother's cousin, and that he was the secretary of the zone. That's all I know.
So,
Do you know if Taya was viewed as being an enemy and if he was purged?
The President, Council, you have already been, ruling was already made yesterday that Council is not allowed to object or to the question put by any member of the bench. You are not allowed to do that, so please be seated.
I understood, good morning everyone, excuse me. I understood the ruling yesterday that I'm not permitted to object, so I would just like to make an observation that purges are...
The President, no observation is being allowed to make at this moment.
Monsieur le témoin.
Mr. Witness, would you like me to repeat the question or can you remember the question? Just to remind you, do you know what happened to Taya and possibly who replaced him?
Response. Yes, I knew about this because after his disappearance, there was a public announcement concerning this. He was said to have betrayed us.
Why did he betray you? Why was there this announcement that he was considered a traitor?
Response. We heard that he had been affiliated with the Vietnamese.
Alors,
I want to ask you a series of questions about how we define enemies, and in so doing, I'd like to refer you to a certain number of documents. The first is E3 stroke 1111. The French ERN is 00532706. Khmer ERN 00376671. ERN in English is 00524192. This telegram is headed Advice Given to 920, and it's dated 23rd of September 1976. It's to beloved and missed Comrade Chin. So my first question is, we've already been talking about a certain Chin during our discussions. Can you confirm for us that Chin was the Secretary of Division 920?
Response. Yes, it is correct. Chen was the commander of their division.
So the telegram reads as follows. Based on the news, the revisionist enemies, in the French version it says the equivalent of reformist, and in English it says revisionist, especially the Group 7, initiated communications with an attempt to burrow from within our army and the base. Meanwhile, they contacted some traitors to encourage the people against the cooperatives and oppose the line of our socialist revolution, especially to burrow from inside for long-term purposes. The following actions, therefore, must be taken. 1. Conducting education sessions for all the division committees in order for them to be well acquainted with the enemy artifices. 2. Tracking any persons who have been contracted with Group 7 or who have sympathies with Group 7 to ensure that they will not hold any leadership positions in the army, whatever their rank. The ideology of comrades who work as the division representatives and play a role in contacting Group 7 must be closely monitored, ideologically speaking, without taking one's attention away from them for 1 second. Experience indicates that Group 7 people always entice our communication committee to serve their Cambodia invasion policies. Some committee members in some places have already been contacted. Therefore, absolute vigilance is needed to prevent them from boring within the army, from cadre to combatants. In particular, contacts with the border division are absolutely prohibited. Signed, Q, who one assumes is Son Sen, with copies to Brother 81, Brother Som, Brother Nat, Brother Ren, and for the documentation. Have you heard of the 7 group?
Response. No, I haven't. I haven't heard anything about the 7 group.
Alors, je vais lire.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to turn to another document. It's E3/1187. Excuse me, says the interpreter, 1196. The French ERN is 00597060. In Khmer, 50879. English 0050 6647. It's Telegram 33, dated 26th of November 1976, signed by Chan. Perhaps, Mr. President, the witness could be given a copy of the document. So, the telegram is signed by Chan and addressed to Office 870. Now, can you tell us who Chan is?
Response: I don't know this person clearly.
Est-ce que vous pensez...
Do you believe that there is any connection between Chang and somebody called Lang? Perhaps the Lang who is your father, was your father?
Response: No, I haven't heard about this.
Bien, donc on va retirer le document des...
In that case, please remove the document from the witness, but I will read it out anyway. Telegram 33 to beloved and missed Office 870. We would like to inform you about the situation at the base. The activity is similar to that of 1974. There has been stone throwing into houses at many places. People are seen at night, but we were not able to shoot them in time. 2. The situation of the 7 people remains the same. We have adopted military measures. Both the divisions and sector units are in consensus. I would point out that this telegram was copied to Brother Nun, therefore Nun Chian, Brother Kiev, Sun Sen, in all probability, the office and documentation. I'd now like to look at another document, a document that you saw yesterday. It was presented to you by the co-prosecutors. It's document E3/877. In French, ERN 00283109. In Khmer 0021513. And in English 00185226. Here we're looking at a telegram that was sent by Chan to beloved and missed Office 870. And yesterday, unless I am mistaken, you told us that this telegram from Chan had been sent by your father, unless I got that wrong. So I propose that this document be shown once again to the witness so that he can tell us what he thinks.
Alors, vous...
Witness, do you remember this telegram?
Response. During this period, my elder sibling was working at that place. So to be precise about this person's name, we may need to talk to my sister, because this is the secret name. As Chan could have been another person, because my father did not use other name other than Lang. However, it was possible that people could have different names, because names could be changed from time to time during the Khmer Rouge regime.
Alors,
in the document there is a reference to suspicions vis-à-vis the contemptible Som and Chin. And we were told that yesterday that Chin was the Secretary of Division 920, that such matters were reported to Comrade San. Can you tell us who Comrade San is?
Response. San was Comrade Chin's successor at Division 920.
et il est dit
And it then goes on to say, despite arrests of Unit 920's activities continue one after the other, but we're making arrest after arrest too. Did you know what was going on in Division 920?
Response. At that time, people continued to disappear one after another. I learned about this.
Let's look at one last document, E3/1030, ERN in French 00623150, in Khmer 0003312, English 00324806. This is a telegram from Sophia to beloved and missed Brother Chan. Brother Chan. Does the name Sophia mean anything to you? Can you tell us who Sophia might be?
Response. I am not sure which Sophia the message referred to here, because there was a person by the name of Sophia who was in charge of the military at that time, at that zone.
Voilà, je vous...
Let me read the document, and then you can tell us what you think. I would like to report about the situation of the 7 group as follows. At Au Play, they intruded 20 kilometers, it says in the French, meters in the English, into our land and cut bamboo. We attacked and killed and wounded a number of them on the 17th of June 1977. Then it goes on to say that there were some clashes, and then in paragraph 2 it says the 7 group attacked us at Bikjenda. They now attacked and entered Puchli Chas. Now, when you hear these names and the name of Group 7, does this mean anything to you?
Response. Having listened to this, I can say that this Group 7 could have been the Vietnamese. That's my understanding. And this is how I may conclude based on the experience during my work there. However, I cannot say exactly this group of people could have been the Vietnamese 100%.
Est-ce que,
To your knowledge, were the soldiers who participated in the revolutionary struggle under the command of the Vietnamese? Were they then subsequently considered as enemies?
I am sorry, I do not understand the question. Could you please clarify it?
Among the soldiers who comprised the Khmer Rouge forces, there were soldiers who, at another time, had served under the Vietnamese. Do you have knowledge of that or not?
Yes, I do. At the time, there were some soldiers, particularly those who were in Mandaluyong province. They were also working alongside with their Vietnamese counterpart.
et il semblerait que
And it would appear that as of 1973, there were agreements according to which those soldiers would no longer be working under the Vietnamese, but they would be serving exclusively under the Khmer Rouge. Do you recall this?
I recall some of the events. Well, actually, it was not in the form of superior command structure. I mean, it does not mean that the Vietnamese were the superior and we were following them, but actually we work with them as counterparts. But later on, in mid-1975, we were sent to the battlefield along the border, and at that time I was also sent there as well. I was assisting them in supplying items also, or in the transport or logistic support.
et en quoi cela
And how did that alter relations with the Vietnamese?
At first, we cooperated in order to fight against Turkey rather, along the border.
vous remercie.
Very well. I wish to thank you, Mr. Witness, for all of your responses. Mr. President, I have no further questions to put. Thank you.
President, thank you, Judge. Now I hand over the floor to the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chie to put questions to the witness. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, good morning, everyone, and good morning to you, Mr. Witness. Thank you very much for coming to give your evidence today and this week. I'm one of the lawyers for Nguyen Chie, along with my colleague, Major Sun Arun, and we both have some questions for you today. Let me begin by giving you a brief outline of the main areas that I intend to cover. First of all, I'll start with some questions regarding your knowledge of Tas Arun, who you spoke about. I'll then move on to what you've told us about the communication structure at K-17 in Sector 105. And finally, time permitting, but I don't think we'll have a problem with time, I'll ask you some questions about a variety of other matters, including a few of your experiences prior to 1975. Before I begin with any of that, I would like to first confirm your present address, your current address. I believe you told us it's somewhere in Malay District. And if you wouldn't mind, could you please tell me again exactly where your current residence is located in Cambodia?
My current address is in Malay, Sub-District, Malay District, Banteay Meanchey Province. And my house number is 01, Sataprum Street.
Very well, thank you for that, Mr. Witness. How long have you lived at that particular location?
I have lived in Malay District following the arrival of UNTAC.
Thank you. And prior to the arrival of UNTAC, where were you living?
Prior to the arrival of UNTAC, I was living in 105 Street 505, rather.
In which town, Mr. Witness?
At that time, it was not a downtown area. It was called Corridor 505, but now it was called Tmoda. And it was the place where Nguyen Chie worked as well. And Pol Pot and Khieu Samphan also had their office over there.
Thank you. Is that also in the northwest part of the country?
It was somewhere along the border of Posat and Kakhong province. And it was also close to the Trat province of Thailand.
Thank you very much. So just to be absolutely clear, when you talk about the border, you are indeed talking about the border between Cambodia, and Thailand, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much for that preliminary information, Mr. Witness. I'll now move on to those more substantive matters I mentioned. Let's start with Sao Sorun. You've told us over the course of this week that your father was the secretary in charge of Office K-17, and that he was succeeded in that position by Ta Sorun. That is, Ta Sorun took over the position following your father's death. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Now, according to one of the statements you gave to the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges, the investigators from that office, you were asked whether you knew about any killings that took place in Sector 105, and you gave the following answer, and I'm quoting now, I'll give the reference in a moment. During my father's era, there was no killing. But during the Ta Sorun era, the arrests of whole families were made, but I don't know where those families were taken to be killed. And before I ask you a question about that, Mr. Witness, just let me, for everyone's benefit, give the reference to the document. That is, and you've seen this document already, Mr. Witness, this is E357. It's a written record of an interview with you and the investigators of the OCIJ. It's dated the 10th of March, 2009. And the passage I just read is at English page 6, and that's ERN 00290508, Khmer 00287705, and French 00353104. So again, perhaps I'll just repeat it for you. During my father's era, there was no killing, but during the Ta Sorun era, the arrests of whole families were made, but I don't know where those families were taken to be killed. So my first question to you, Mr. Witness, is that a correct statement of your evidence? Is that accurate, that during Ta Sorun's tenure in Section 105, whole families were arrested and taken somewhere to be killed?
That is correct. I did not know the arrest myself, but what I knew was that there were arrests of people, and then those people never came. And as for during my father's era, there were only a few families who disappeared, like An called Chun family disappeared. But when Ta Sorun came to take the place of my father, whole families were taken away and they disappeared. And this was the correct summary of my statement.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Witness. I'm going to move on. I'm going to stay with this topic. I'm going to move on to another document. This document has been put before the chamber. It has an E3 number. It's been used in court already. It's E3/1664. It's a DC CAM document. That is a document prepared by the Documentation Center of Cambodia. It's entitled Khmer Rouge Purges in the Mondulkiri Highlands. And at the bottom, it refers to a document series of DC CAM. The document, or the ERN number, in Khmer is 00397566 through 00397749. French 00742838 through 007428.
President, Counsel, please repeat the ERN numbers because you read it rather fast. It was not followed by the interpreters. Could you please read out rather slowly so that it can be properly rendered?
I will indeed. My apologies to the translators. Khmer ERN 00397566 through 00397749. French ERN 00742838 through 00742889. I'm interested in two particular passages, and I've only got the English ERNs for those. I don't think this entire document has been translated, but I'll read the bit into the record. The first page is English 00397653. Mr. Witness, I'm going to read a passage to you from this document, and then I'll ask you some questions about those passages. I'm actually going to read you 3 passages, but I'll do that step by step, one at a time. So again, the first one, I'm quoting now. With Horm's death, Sarun, an ethnic Lao, became Secretary of Region 105. The conflict between Kampun and Horm and the installation of Sarun as Region Secretary led to the imposition of stricter rules in the region and coincided with a period of the greatest number of deaths. So my first question, Mr. Witness, can you confirm that Horm was indeed an alias or another name used by your father? Is that correct?
Horm was one of the alias of my father. Actually, this name was derived from a Laotian name.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. My next question, is it correct, according to your knowledge, of course, that the rules imposed in Sector 105 became stricter, that is more strict, more harsh, under Sarun's leadership, that is, after your father's death?
That I do not know because I did not stay in the region at that time. But to my understanding, those who were at the sector's level had to follow strictly the instruction from the upper authority. They did not dare to make any decision all on their own. That's what I can clarify it for you. At that time, everyone were self-disciplined.
Thank you. And you've already told us that there was an increased number of arrests and possibly killings during Sarun's leadership. Would you agree then with this passage that under Sarun's leadership, that period rather, was associated with a greater number of deaths than your father's? That is, than the period in which your father was in charge of Sector 105.
To my understanding, I actually also learned it from my friends as well that following the death of my father and during the tenure of Sarun, many people disappeared.
Thank you. Moving on to the next passage. And I'm in the same document, and I'm on the following page in English, so that's 00397654. And again, Mr. Witness, I'm quoting from this document. many informants mark the beginning of the most radical changes in Mondulkiri to late 1977 and 1978, when Sarun took power. So again, based on your experience, your personal knowledge, what others may have told you, would you agree with that assessment that radical changes took place in Mondulkiri after Sarun took control of the sector?
ตามการเคย
I actually witnessed the disappearance of people. I asked the villagers, for example, where was the family of Mr. A, for example. Then they told me that they had already disappeared.
Thank you very much. And the third and final passage from this same document, the same page that I just mentioned, Mr. Witness, again I'm quoting, after Sarun became the region secretary, they arrested people every day, 4 or 5 people a day. The chief of the cooperative tried to intimidate the people to work harder by telling them Sarun was going to kill the lazy people. Now again, if you know, according to your knowledge or experience, is that an accurate statement of the situation in Sector 105 after Tasarun became the secretary?
I tend to disagree with this statement because it was not as harsh as what it is stated in this, because they did not actually kill lazy people as being stated. We can also ask other people who were still who are still alive, those who had come across the experience. Some of them are now alive and they are living somewhere in Long Veng district. We may ask them for further clarification, but I do not think that the policy at that time was that harsh.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. So just so I understand you clearly, you disagree with the portion indicating that people were killed because they were lazy. Is that correct?
In my personal understanding, I simply do not believe that the only fact that they were lazy was the factor for their execution. Of course, at that time they did kill people, but these were minor things, and I did not believe that it would amount to the execution of those people. Only those who were alleged of being the enemies, for example, those people were destined to be executed. But it was also the decision of the upper authority who pass it down to people at the lower level to carry out the activity.
Very well, thank you for that. I understand. Yesterday, actually it wasn't yesterday, I believe it was the day before, you discussed with the international co-prosecutor a so-called 12-point moral code, and I believe you indicated that you did not recall the specifics of that particular code, but nevertheless the essence of the code, I believe is how you put it, was to respect people. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. And then you went on to indicate, in that same exchange with the international co-prosecutor, you went on to indicate that later on in the DK regime, people deviated from that standard. That is, they didn't follow that standard. and they lived by what you said, what you described, were their own moral codes. Is that correct?
No, I don't think I have said that.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Perhaps I'll just read back what we have quoted in the draft transcript, and then you can correct it for me. And I'm quoting now from the draft trial transcript of of 11 December. That was 2 days ago. At page 83, lines 1 through 12. And the question was, can you tell us a little bit about the 12-point moral code that had to be adhered to? And the answer was, I do not recall the 12 moral codes, but most important of all was the moral livings in the early days. In the early days, many people supported these 12 moral codes, but later on, everyone was alleged of the enemies in the party. That's why people did not abide by these moral codes anymore. Of course, the essence of the moral codes was to respect each other in society, pay respect to Buddhist monks, and so on and so forth. But later on, people did not adhere to these 12 moral codes. They lived by their own moral codes. Now, that's what we have in the draft transcript, so please correct me if that's not what you said or if that's not accurate. Is that what I've just read an accurate reflection of your evidence?
Yes, that's what I said in court. It was the truth, and I simply would like to give an example concerning the 12 moral codes. During the war era, the 12 moral codes were strictly applied. For example, in Mandalkiri province, people had to pay a great respect to Buddhist monk, and they must not steal not even a piece of chili of the villagers. But later on, the Khmer Rouge confiscated all the belongings of people. They put them into collective use, and people were not very happy with this practice. So they did not follow these 12 moral codes anymore, and they did not see Buddhist monks anymore either. And money or currency were abolished. Everything was in a collective form. So they no longer abided by these moral codes.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. And would you agree, was it the case that your father adhered to the moral codes, that he tried his best to follow those moral codes in the early days of the regime?
Actually, during my father's tenure, he did not agree with the practice. Everyone wanted to protest, but they dare not do it. And at that time, I was too young as well. I did not understand the politics, and I only heard from others what they did. So at that time, all people did not content with this practice, but they dare not go against it.
So, just so I have you clearly, are you saying that your father and others didn't agree with the decay practices, but they still believed in these moral codes you discussed, but they didn't dare to say that? Is that what you meant?
The President, witness, please make sure the mic is activated before you proceed. You may now proceed. Response. Yes, it is correct. Everyone did not prefer this policy, but they did not have, they were not brave enough to challenge it.
Thank you. What about Tasarun? Would you agree, given what you've told us already about the increased killings under his tenure and the changes that took place during his leadership, would you agree that Tasarun exercised his leadership in a manner quite different from your father, and that perhaps he himself, Tasarun, deviated from those moral codes you told us about?
The President, Mr. Witness, please hold on. International Court Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to everybody. It does seem to me that this question is on the verge of asking the witness to speculate. He himself said he wasn't there. The only source of information he had was friends who he probably spoke to well after the event. So it seems to me that this question is rather expecting too much of the witness in asking him to identify practices under Tasarun while he himself was in Phnom Penh at the time. So I think that this question is inviting the witness to speculate on what happened when he wasn't there.
Mr. President, if I could just respond briefly. I'm not asking the witness to speculate, and perhaps I'll rephrase the question and put it in a more direct way. I would just like to say that all of the witnesses, nearly all of the witnesses that have testified in this courtroom, have to some degree or another given us what we would call hearsay evidence. That is, evidence that of things they saw or heard, or that other people saw or heard, and then told them. So that, as a starting point, would be my first response, that hearsay evidence is not only admissible before this chamber, it's widely used. Second point I would make is that the witness has already told us, based on his experience in talking to people and his own personal experience at the time, that he does have some knowledge of what happened under Tasarun's tenure. So perhaps I could break up the question, because I think it was a bit of a compound question. Let me ask you this, Mr. Witness. You've told us about your father and how he believed in that moral code that you described, but he wasn't able, unfortunately, to adhere to it. And you've also told us about the several differences in the leadership styles, or the leadership, the effects of the leadership, shall we say, of your father and Tasarun. So my question is, let me make it a bit more simple. How would you compare your father and Tasarun?
Response. I cannot make a comparison between these two people because I did not stay under the time when Tasarun worked there. When hearing that people disappeared, asked some questions from the villagers about this, so it makes it difficult for me to compare the two people's leadership style.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Witness. I'm going to stay with this topic just a little while longer. I'm almost finished with this, my first area. You may be aware, you may not, Mr. Witness, that Tasarun has already testified before this chamber. That is, he sat in the same chair where you're sitting now and gave us some testimony, answered some questions by all of us. And he was confronted specifically with some of your testimony, some of your OCIJ testimony, and in particular, he was confronted with the bit that you just confirmed for us this morning, that is, when you told us that during my father's era there was no killing, but during the Tasarun era the arrests of whole families were made, but I don't know where those families were taken to be killed. That very portion was put to Mr. Sasarun, and he very clearly rejected your testimony. He rejected it, he denied it, and what he said was, in particular, and I'm quoting, no whole family members would ever be arrested. I think the person who stated this, and there he's referring to you, Mr. Witness, must be exaggerating, because we never made any arrest of any villager to be executed. So he, Sasarun, has very clearly rejected your testimony in that regard. So my first question to you is, were you in fact exaggerating when you told the investigators from the OCIJ that whole families were arrested during Sasarun's period of leadership? Or, as you've already told us this morning, was your evidence accurate and correct?
Response. I did not observe the proceedings during the time when Sasarun took the stand. But I am not in a position to exaggerate. I do not know who gave him orders to arrest people, but I learned that people were arrested, and a lot more people were disappearing. Another person who was a very honest tribal person was also arrested, and I couldn't believe that such an honest person like him could disappear. And some other people were also believed to have disappeared. I do not really implicate him in making such arrests, but the arrests were made during his tenure. And I asked a lot of people about this, and they confirmed that such arrests did happen.
Thank you for that, Mr. Witness. Do you have any personal knowledge as to why Sasarun would reject that piece of your testimony? Do you think he's attempting to minimize his own responsibilities?
The President, international, lead co-lawyer for the civil parties, you may now proceed. Counsel Pick on Mr. President, I take issue with this line of questioning because it invited witness to speculate. And international co-prosecutor, we noted you were on your feet a moment ago. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. It was certainly along the same lines. The Chamber has decided several times that questions should not be put to the witness on the subject of the hypothetical thoughts of another witness who is not there. And the witness is thus being invited to speculate or put himself in somebody else's shoes, and that's not his role before this Chamber. Thank you.
Again, if I could just briefly respond to that question, I would fully accept that we cannot ask witnesses to speculate as to hypothetical matters. However, I would strongly disagree with the suggestion that a witness cannot know something because someone may have told him that. I know many things because people have told them to me. I don't experience everything in life firsthand through my eyes, through my ears, through my senses. much of what we all experience in life comes from our interactions with other people. I think that's obvious. So it may be the case that the witness sitting on the stand knows what I'm talking about, has direct personal information about it, and it may be the case that he doesn't. And he is perfectly able, capable, intelligent enough to tell us that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that question I just asked. I believe my colleague wants to make a comment, Mr. President.
The President, indeed, I am waiting for your comment to conclude, and that I would then give the floor to another counsel. Then Counsel Kanawaz, you may now proceed.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors, and good morning to everyone in and around the courtroom. The questions that are being asked are not only relevant, but they're appropriate. And when you look at the manner in which the questions are being asked and how they're framed, they're no different than the questions that were framed by Judge Laverne. I don't think that we're asking the gentleman to speculate. What we're asking the gentleman to do is to make comparisons based on his personal observations and his experiences. Now, it's for the trial chamber to determine at some point what weight to give to that evidence. But the gentleman was there. He was able to see what happened before and after certain events, or where people were involved in holding certain positions. And he certainly can draw some conclusions. And I think that's what was being asked. That's what we normally do. And of course, if there's no independent indicia to back up what the gentleman is saying, you will give it little weight. But I don't see anything that is being asked thus far that we're asking this gentleman to speculate. We're merely asking him to make comparisons based on his observations. And therefore, I think the line of questioning is extremely pertinent, particularly given that he's now being confronted with testimony that was given by the very same witness to which he's being asked to make comparisons to. And I think in fairness to the defense, we should be allowed to explore the same sort of areas. And if the judges avail themselves to ask the sort of questions that we're asking, we should be able to ask those questions as well. Thank you.
The President. Counsel for Mr. Nuntia, you are now instructed to rephrase your question, and please be advised that question that invites witness to speculate should be avoided.
I will certainly do that, Mr. President. Thank you. Mr. Witness, just to recap what's just happened, again, I've told you that Mr. Sausarun has come into this chamber, has given testimony before this chamber, explicitly denying, rejecting, not accepting a piece of your evidence, which you have confirmed for us today. So my simple question is, do you have any personal knowledge as to why he would do that? Do you have any personal knowledge to indicate that he's attempting to minimize his responsibility before this chamber, as it obviously appears? And if you don't, Mr. Witness, if you don't have any personal knowledge, then you can simply tell us, and that's completely acceptable to me. I couldn't expect you to tell us something that you don't know anything about.
Witness, I don't know about this.
Very well. Thank you for that. Mr. Witness, I have one more question on this topic, the topic of Sausarun, and then I'll move on to my next one. Again, just to refresh your memory, earlier, not very long ago at all, I read 3 passages to you from a document prepared by DC Cam, and we had a discussion about those passages. Those very passages, those same passages which I should add that you agreed with, either wholly or in part you did make some qualifications. However, I would say that you generally agreed with them. Those very passages were put to Mr. Sausarun. And again, he rejected them outright. And this is what he had to say to the chamber. My answer to this, to hearing those passages, is that the matter is not correct. Those who reported this are exaggerating the facts. I never saw or knew of killings of the people. I deny this statement. When I took power, it lasts only for 2 months. I was not a strong man who arrested people. I reject what was read out just now. It was accusing me incorrectly. So again, my question would be, do you have any personal knowledge as to why Mr. Sausarun would come into court and reject these passages which relate to his responsibility? Do you know, and tell us if you don't, that he is attempting to minimize his responsibility before this trial chamber?
The President witness is now instructed not to respond to the question because it was inviting you to speculate. Counsel has already been advised, and be cautious when putting questions to the witness. And counsels were asked also not to put questions that inviting such speculation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will move on, but before I do that, I will just say for the record, it was a completely appropriate question. It was framed as a search for information that may be within the witness.
The President, you may as well proceed. The questions, again, that are inviting a witness to speculate or provide his or her personal conclusion are not allowed.
Thank you. Just to clarify that, did you say personal conclusion? That's what came through on the English translation, that we are not permitted to elicit a witness's personal conclusions. So my question would be, what else are we doing here?
The President, indeed, the witness is not expected to speculate. That's all.
ការអនុវត្តនេះយើងអនុវត្ត
And this has been the practice all along from the very beginning of this trial. It has been more than 1 year that we've been adhering to the same practices. Questions by the counsel to the experts may be of those that are for some kind of personal, rather speculation, if you like. Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the purposes of the transcript and so that we all understand each other, when I heard the French translation, it mentioned hypothetical conclusions, hypothétique, and so that presumably came from the English, and so we're not talking about personal conclusions, but hypothetical ones. That, at least, is what we heard. Thank you.
Perhaps then it's just, as so many things are in this chamber, a matter of translation. I can assure you it was not a hypothetical question. It was not a request for the witness to speculate. It was simply a request whether or not the witness knew that a particular thing had occurred, whether it was in the witness's knowledge that Sao Sarun minimized his own responsibility here in court, whether that's why he denied all those questions that were put to him about his own role. Again, if the witness doesn't know that, there's nothing I can do about that. And I don't want the witness to speculate. So that's all I have to say. And again, getting back to what you said, Mr. President, about experts, I don't see how that really applies. I wasn't asking for an expert opinion from this witness. I was asking for his personal...
The President, Counsel, you may proceed to other questions, please. You are not allowed to give us instruction or teaching us.
I wouldn't dare, Mr. President. I'll move on to my next structure, or my next question. And these questions, Mr. Witness, relate to K-17, Office K-17, and its communication structure. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about what you've told us already. This shouldn't take too long. Hopefully I can finish this segment before the morning coffee break. Yesterday and the day before, you answered some questions by the international co-prosecutor regarding alleged communications between Office K-17 and Nguyen Chia, our client, on two issues in particular: security matters, I believe you said, and invitations to certain meetings in Phnom Penh. And with respect to the second category, that is the invitation to the meetings, you have described a certain invitation that closely preceded your father's death. And just to reorient you, this relates, to a discussion that you had yesterday with Judge Laverne, the French judge on the bench. You no doubt heard what I had to say yesterday about that issue. I stand by that position, that it's an irrelevant topic. What happened to your father after he arrived in Phnom Penh. However, given that the bench seems to take a particular interest in this, I'm going to ask you just one or two questions about that.
The President, Counsel, you are instructed not to make a lot of comments before putting questions. You may proceed to the questions right away. Please try not to make a lot unnecessary comments that may lead to you putting some leading questions because of the comments. The questions should be simple, short, and precise, and then they must not be repetitive. Because if the questions are framed in that nature, you will get straightforward response.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will just say, for the record, at times it is necessary to set a context for questions. Everybody does that before this chamber. Every single advocate who has been on his or her feet has done.
The President, but what we want to hear from you now is putting the question right away. Indeed, you are not given the opportunity here to make any comments. You have been told that the floor is given to you to put questions to the witness.
To tweet, Mr. President, I will do that immediately. Mr. Witness, you discussed the death of your father with Judge Laverne. Judge Laverne asked you when that particular episode occurred, and you told Judge Laverne, if I'm not correct, that you were not quite sure about the precise date. So I'd like to refer you, if I may, to one of your statements. And this is another record of one of those interviews that you gave to the investigators of the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges. And this one, in particular, is E357. E357. And again, I believe that's the same one I mentioned already, so I don't need to read out the ERN numbers again. I will refer you strictly to the page 6. Again, it's the same page that I mentioned before. And you were asked this question: in what year did you come to Phnom Penh with your father? And this is very much in the context of what you told Judge Laverne, and you said in late 1977. Now, does that refresh your recollection in any sense as to when you made that allegedly ultimate trip, that is the last trip your father is said to have made to Phnom Penh? Could it have been or was it in late 1977, as you told the investigators?
Response. I stated that I did not remember this quite clearly.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Witness. So, do you not stand by your statement then?
Response. The statement that I stand by is that I'm not quite sure about that.
Very well. Perhaps we could try to figure it out. You told us that you and your father, or that your father made many trips to Phnom Penh, many trips, and that you accompanied him on those trips. Is that correct? He made several trips to Phnom Penh, and you accompanied him each and every time?
Response. Yes, it is correct.
Do you have any idea, do you have any recollection, and again, just tell me if you don't, do you have any recollection as to how many of those trips you made? Was it 2 or 3? Was it 10? Was it 25? Roughly, can you give us a rough guess or rough estimation, or if you remember clearly, how many of those trips did you make to Phnom Penh with your father?
Response. I don't remember this. I may say I don't know.
Thank you. Would it be more than 10 or less than 10? Are you able to say that?
Response. I don't quite understand your question. Are you saying talking about the frequency of my going with him in a period of 1 month, 1 year, or the whole period?
No, I'm just, apologies for not being clear. I'm still trying to see if we can arrive at a rough estimation as to when that final trip took place. So I'm asking you, did you take more or less than 10 trips in total with your father, if you remember?
Response. I may say it was less than 10 times.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will move on now to my second question regarding this alleged invitation to Phnom Penh, the invitation that you discussed with Judge Laverne. Do you know the reason that was given for your father to go on?
The President, Council, please accept our apologies to interrupt. Indeed, you are now moving to the new topic in your questioning, and since it is now appropriate time for the adjournment, we may adjourn, and that when we resume, you can proceed with that new line of questioning. Court officer is now instructed to assist the witness and his duty counsel during the adjournment and have them return to the courtroom when the next session resumes. We resume at 10 to 11.
សូមក្រោកឈរ